I spent 50 years by Ray's side, sharing a life built on compromise and quiet devotion. But it wasn't until she was drawing her final breath that I realized how much she resented it. On her deathbed, Ray confessed. She told me that the love letter 50 years ago had been placed on my desk by mistake. It was meant for Wright, the golden boy of our high school class. "But I don't regret it," she whispered, her voice fragile against the steady beep of the heart monitor. Wright was like the wind, wild, free. I couldn't be selfish enough to cage him. I couldn't speak, hooked up to the hum of the machines, letting her squeeze my hand. "Thomas," she said, looking at me with a soft, tearful sincerity, "if there's a next life, I'd marry you all over again." I gave a microscopic shake of my head, but I wouldn't. For her, I had turned down Columbia. A single misstep had set off a domino effect, pulling me further and further from my dreams, leaving me trapped in a kitchen of domesticity, dealing with pots and pans for 50 years. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in our senior year of high school. I stared at the dusty pink envelope sitting in my desk drawer. Without a second thought, I tossed it straight into the recycling bin. This time, I was going to be like a bird, flying toward my own mountain. 1. Just as my fingertips brushed the pink envelope, a loud gasp echoed next to me. "Oh my God! Thomas, is that a love letter?" My desk neighbor, Zach, practically shouted, his voice dripping with excitement. Instantly, half the classroom turned to stare, eager for gossip. I saw Ray's face go pale. She instinctively glanced at Wright, then quickly, guiltily pulled her gaze back. The kids in the back started chanting, egging me on to open it. Ray's eyes darted between me and Wright. I could see the internal struggle waging in her eyes, the sheer panic of exposure. When Zach reached out, teasingly trying to grab the letter, Ray seemed to resign herself to her fate. She stood up, walking toward my desk. "It's from..." Her voice cut off. She froze, watching in absolute disbelief as I calmly stood up and tossed the envelope into the recycling bin by the door. "Just some stupid senior prank, I guess," I said, offering a casual, easy shrug. I sat back down, picking up my pen, and went right back to my AP calculus prep. I could feel a heavy, complicated gaze burning into the side of my face, but I kept my eyes glued to the paper, acting completely oblivious. Ray stood there for what felt like an eternity, hesitating. Then, without a word to me, she bypassed my desk and went to sit next to Wright. Her ears were burning red. The raw, desperate longing in her eyes was too bright to hide. A familiar, dull ache bloomed in my chest. I had loved Ray in secret for 3 long years. In my past life, when I found that letter, I had been dizzy with joy. I had been so hopelessly in love that I threw away my acceptance letter to Columbia just to stay in her hometown, ensuring we went to the same state college. I threw away my dreams of polar research, happily trading them for a lifetime of cooking dinners, doing laundry, and raising 3 kids. Until I fell ill. I was lying in that hospital bed while Ray stared at the TV screen, where a documentary about Wright was playing. "Thomas," she had said, her voice heavy with a lifetime of quiet regret. "Every single night, I wonder, if I hadn't put that letter on the wrong desk, would my life have been less of a struggle?" On screen, Wright was accepting an award. He had spent his life traveling the globe, writing bestsellers about his wild adventures. He had fame, freedom, and applause. Ray stared at him like he was a god, then turned her gaze to my hands, rough, calloused, worn down by decades of domestic labor. She let out a soft, bittersweet laugh. "Well, it's for the best. Wright was a free spirit. I could never have kept him in one place. Thomas, in the next life, let's do it again." I passed away that night, but in the final second before darkness took me, a thought I had suppressed for 50 years flared up with terrifying clarity. In the next life, I am not marrying you. I am going to Columbia. I am going to Antarctica. I am reclaiming my dream. The memory snapped me back to the present. The lingering ache in my chest vanished, replaced by an icy resolve. I focused entirely on my textbook. When the final bell rang, I was surprised by how quickly the afternoon had flown. I packed my notebooks, slinging my backpack over one shoulder. "Hey!" Zach pulled my backpack strap, stopping me. "Aren't you waiting for Ray?" I turned and gave him a faint, polite smile. "Not today. Not anymore." 2. I walked right past the lonely shadow lingering near the school gates, keeping my eyes fixed ahead. When I got home, I sat at my desk, opening my laptop to look up Columbia's incoming freshman research programs. My phone on the desk started buzzing incessantly. Irritated by the disruption, I unlocked it. It was Ray. Dozens of unread texts flooded the screen. "Why didn't you wait for me? Aren't we studying tonight?" "Yeah, sorry. Schoolwork is piling up." "No time," I typed back, a curt, dismissive reply. Without hesitation, I removed her from my favorites list and toggled her notifications to Do Not Disturb. No more texts came through. I flipped the phone face down, completely uncaring of whatever she might be feeling. In my past life, Ray and I were the classic childhood sweethearts that we grew up on the same block, went to the same schools. But while I was pulling a near-perfect academic track, Ray barely managed AC average. "Whatever," she used to say, laughing it off. "School isn't my thing anyway." But right before the final exams, she suddenly pulled all-nighters, looking at me with a rare, desperate seriousness. "Thomas, please tutor me. I want us to go to the same college." I had been thrilled. For weeks, I stayed up late compiling study guides, mapping out personalized lesson plans, and packaging them up for her, only for those exact study guides to end up on Wright's desk. I had been devastated, my mind so cluttered with hurt that I completely tanked the next mock exam. For the first time in my life, I fell from the top spot. I remember staring at the leaderboard, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the bulletin board. Ray had stood beside me. She reached out to pat my shoulder, then hesitated and pulled her hand back, mumbling, "It's fine. You'll get it back next time." It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth. Some kids had been mocking Wright for always being second best. He had actually cried about it. Ray hadn't asked for my help to catch up to me. She had wanted to drag me down so her precious Wright could have his moment of glory. I took a deep breath, pushing down the old, burning anger, and focused on my review sheets. Many concepts were rusty, having been locked away in my mind for 50 years. I studied until the early hours of the morning, resulting in me oversleeping the next day. I rushed out the door, turning the corner of our street, only to find Ray waiting next to her bicycle. "Thomas, come on, hop on. I'll give you a ride." I checked my watch. We were running tight on time. Swallowing my pride, I hopped on the back peg of her bike. Ray started pedaling. "Are you still mad at me?" she asked quietly. She reached into her jacket and handed me a warm breakfast sandwich she'd been keeping insulated. I looked at it, a tiny ripple of emotion passing through me, but I didn't take it. "Just pedal," I murmured. We hadn't gone 3 blocks when she suddenly gasped, tapping my shoulder frantically. "Thomas, stop." Her voice was frantic. I dragged my feet on the pavement to help her brake, and the bike screeched to a halt. Wright twisted his ankle. "I have to go check on him. You take the bike, Thomas. Just go so you aren't late." She practically threw the handlebars at me, jumping off before I could even respond, and ran back toward the intersection without a single backward glance. I looked back. There was Wright, sitting on the curb, cradling his ankle with tears welling in his eyes. Free! Ray was already by his side, gently helping him stand. The two of them began limping toward school together, completely forgetting I even existed. I let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh. I rode the bike to the nearest trash can, tossed her breakfast sandwich inside, and kept riding. By the time I reached homeroom, the bell had already rung. The teacher made me stand at the back of the class for the entire first period. When the bell finally rang to dismiss us, Wright walked over to my desk, looking incredibly guilty. He held out a carton of chocolate milk, thrusting it into my hands. Thomas, I am so sorry. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have been late. Ray was hovering right behind him like a protective shadow. I looked down at the carton, then walked over to the trash can and dropped it right in. Wright's eyes immediately filled with tears. Thomas, what is your problem? Ray snapped, her face darkening instantly. She raised her voice, drawing the attention of the entire classroom. Wright is trying to apologize. Do you have to be so incredibly petty? I paused, looking at her with a cold, mocking smile. I'm lactose intolerant. Stop making excuses. Ray cut me off, her patience entirely gone. She grabbed Wright's arm, pulling him away. Just because I talk to someone else doesn't mean you get to throw a temper tantrum, Thomas. I'm not your property and I don't exist just to cater to you. I watched them walk away, a soft scoff escaping my lips. Ray had forgotten. When we were kids, she had stolen a handful of wild strawberries from a neighbor's garden. She had popped one into my mouth. I ended up in the ICU that night, fighting to breathe. I spent a week in the hospital. The day I was discharged, a sobbing Ray swore she would never let me get sick again. Now, she didn't even remember. After that classroom scene, Ray gave me the silent treatment. She started saving seats for Wright in the cafeteria, buying him lunch, and detouring 30 minutes out of her morning routine just to walk him to school. Every sweet, exclusive gesture that had once belonged to me was now proudly paraded in front of Wright. The high school gossip mill was in overdrive. I thought Thomas and Ray were a locked deal. Guess the childhood friend always loses to the new guy. Sucks to be Thomas. I blocked it all out, dedicating every ounce of my energy to my classes. Perhaps she heard the rumors, because a few days later, Ray approached my desk with a strange, defensive air. Wright has a lot of pride, she said, her tone carrying a weird mixture of relief and expectation. You shouldn't have embarrassed him like that in public. She slid a small piece of paper onto my desk. If you apologize to Wright, we can go back to how things were. I looked down. It was a faded, slightly crumpled piece of construction paper with crooked, childlike handwriting. Truce token. A wave of dark amusement washed over me, though I couldn't bring myself to smile. I picked up the token and tore it into tiny, irreparable pieces. Ray's face froze. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, her expression icy. The next morning, she asked the teacher to change her seat. She moved from the row next to mine to the desk right beside Wright. During AP Calculus, when I stood up to answer a question, I happened to glance down. Beneath their desks, their fingers were tightly intertwined. If her previous coldness had been a childish attempt to make me jealous, this was different. Ray was now treating me like absolute air. Meanwhile, she and Wright were moving at lightning speed. 4. The week before final exams, I was called into the guidance counselor's office. Congratulations, Thomas. Columbia has officially offered you an early admission full-ride scholarship. The news hit me like a physical wave. I stood there, utterly speechless, my mind racing. The counselor, Mrs. Higgins, smiled, clapping me on the shoulder. You can choose to enroll early next week, or you can stay and walk with your class at graduation. I took a deep breath to steady my racing heart. As I walked out of the office, I ran right into Ray and Wright. Ray pursed her lips, looking straight ahead as she brushed past me as if I were a ghost. I immediately called my parents to discuss the offer, and we agreed I would leave for New York this coming Monday. It was a tight schedule, but I had already looked into it. Columbia was running an early entry polar research fellowship. Selected incoming freshmen could spend a month volunteering on a research vessel heading toward the Antarctic Circle. It was the closest I had ever been to my dream. While I was on the phone in the corridor, Ray suddenly stormed toward me. She lunged forward, her hand swinging wildly, and slapped the phone right out of my hand. Thomas, How could you be so incredibly petty, telling the principal on us? The sharp edge of my phone case scraped against my ear. A stinging pain flared up, and I felt the warm drip of blood beginning to trickle down my neck. Wright cowered behind Ray, his eyes brimming with tears. "Thomas, please. I'll stay away from Ray, I promise. Just tell the principal it was a mistake. If my dad finds out about the suspension, he'll kill me." I pressed a hand to my bleeding ear, suddenly putting the pieces together. Wright's grades had plummeted during the last midterms. The school had caught them making out in an empty classroom, and the administration had warned them. Naturally, they assumed I was the whistleblower. "I didn't say a word to anyone," I snapped, my voice cold and hard as I glared at them. "You two weren't worried about consequences when you were kissing behind the stage curtains. Don't take your stupidity out on me." Ray's face darkened further. She stepped in front of Wright defensively, her voice dripping with venom. "You walked out of the office, and 5 minutes later I got called in. Don't act like it's a coincidence." She gave me a long, disgusted look. "But of course. You've always been so incredibly selfish." By the weekend, I was packing my bags. Ray didn't know I was leaving. There was no reason to tell her. But to my surprise, she showed up at my front door on Sunday afternoon. "Thomas, right?" And I broke up. She watched my face closely, taking a step forward to reach for my hand. "Studying has been so stressful lately. I was losing my mind, and I only did those things because I was desperately trying to keep up with you. My scores are only good enough for the local state college. Thomas, the promise we made when we were kids, does it still count? When we were 7, we had crossed pinkies, promising we would go to the same university." She didn't even realize that she blinked rapidly whenever she lied. Our state college only accepted one student for their prestigious pre-med track each year. She was trying to secure it for Wright by getting me to step down. It must have been so exhausting for her, playing the part of the repentant childhood sweetheart just to clear the runway for her true love. "Sure," I said quietly, wanting to avoid any more drama. "It counts." Ray looked surprised, then a wave of immense relief washed over her. Her eyes drifted to my half-packed suitcases on the floor. "Why are you packing?" "My mom has a business trip," I lied smoothly. Her mind was already elsewhere. She nodded eagerly, backing out the door. "Great. Then I'll see you on Monday, Thomas." I watched her jog down the driveway. As she reached the sidewalk, I could faintly hear her excited voice on the phone, calling Wright to tell him the good news. I took one last look at the yard. In the corner, the rosebush Ray and I had planted years ago had completely withered to dead, thorny branches. I turned away, climbed into the rideshare waiting to take me to the airport, and blocked her number on every single platform before the plane took off. "Ray, I'm done playing my part in your play.